Beyond Libya this weekend, as many as 1,000 civilians were massacred in the Ivory Coast as that nation's political standoff escalated violently. This brutality could be an ominous foreshadowing of future events in the Sudan as the southern portion of that war-torn country becomes an independent nation in July. Further east, Somalia continues to be a source of instability, hosting both al-Qaeda and affiliated al-Shabaab terrorist organization and the various piracy networks that have intensified attacks in the Gulf of Aden and beyond over the past several years, recently killing 4 American citizens aboard a private yacht. Just as it was virtually impossible to foresee the United States becoming militarily involved in Libya, at least at last year's posture hearings, this Congress may be called upon to fund a number of possible contingency operations or humanitarian missions in AFRICOM's AOR. I think when we made New Year's resolutions this year, we did not foresee Egypt, Libya, all of the other things that are happening. Wherever U.S. forces may operate over the next year, TRANSCOM will be charged with getting them there, sustaining them throughout their operations, and getting them home to their families. As General Omar Bradley famously said, amateurs talk strategy and professionals talk logistics. The events of the past 18 months are an instructive example as to the relevance of that quote today. Not only did TRANSCOM have to respond to the surge of forces in Afghanistan, while they simultaneously orchestrated the drawdown of forces in Iraq, but they also had to respond to the devastating earthquake in Haiti. Things have not gotten any easier for the men and women of TRANSCOM as they are now supporting combat operations in Libya, in addition to operations in Iraq and Afghanistan, and are working desperately to assist the people of Japan following the horrific earthquakes of the past month. What they do is not easy, and it oftentimes goes unnoticed, but the capabilities of TRANSCOM are truly unique among nations. We're fortunate to be joined here today by 2 officers with long and distinguished records of service to their nation, General Duncan McNabb, Commander of U.S. Transportation Command, and General Carter Ham, Commander of U.S. Africa Command. Gentlemen, thank you for appearing before us here today, and thank you for your lifetime of service to our nation. And please convey our thanks to those who serve with you in your combat areas. We look forward to hearing your testimony today. Ranking Member Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome, General McNabb, General Ham. Appreciate you being here to testify this afternoon. Look forward to your comments and your answers to our questions. 2 very important commands within the military. Transportation Command first does an amazing job of what the Chairman referred to as logistics. You can imagine all the capabilities we have and where we would like them, but General McNabb is the one who has to make sure that those 2 things match up, and it's not an easy job. When you consider our interests throughout the world and where we have had to move our equipment in recent years, you do an outstanding job, as do the men and women who serve in the Transportation Command. We appreciate that. We have the C-17s out of Joint Base Lewis McChord and McChord Air Force Base who are a big part of that, so we're very proud of what they do as well. Going forward, I think in this hearing, the number of issues we're going to be interested in, but in particular as we figure out how to downsize in Iraq, move equipment out of there, how does that work in terms of getting it back to the States or getting it back to where we want it based? How is that process progressing? What contingencies do you have in place if for some reason sometime in the next 7 to 8 months it turns out that we're going to be leaving more equipment there than we expected? If the Iraqis make a request that we're able to grant for a continued U.S. presence of some very limited scope, I would anticipate, but still that will complicate the transportation of that equipment. And then second, of course, the ongoing challenge of providing for the warfighter in Afghanistan. There are many logistical challenges. We bring a lot of our equipment in through Pakistan, not always a very stable place. The countries to the north of Afghanistan also have their challenges, as we have heard. So I'd be interested in your feelings about how we're doing on that, and what the major challenges are going forward, and how we can better make sure that we get the equipment to Afghanistan that we need. In AFRICOM, as the Chairman mentioned, you have a fair number of challenges in that region. I think the best way to summarize them is instability. Certainly there's a lot of political unrest in a number of nations across the top of Africa. to varying degrees from Tunisia and Egypt and Libya and Morocco, but then also further down in the Ivory Coast, there are major challenges right now. The Democratic Republic of the Congo has an ongoing challenge, particularly in the eastern Congo, with maintaining stability. And that instability can have a very real impact on our national security interests. Al-Qaeda is present, both as AQAP, Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, over close to Somalia, and then Al-Qaeda in the land of the Islamic Maghreb, AQIM, which is throughout the sort of Mali, Mauritania area, and they feed on instability, vast ungoverned spaces where they can operate without people being able to control them. So AFRICOM has a strong interest, not just in Libya, where we're very aware of what's going on, but throughout the continent, and trying to figure out how we combat political unrest, combat poverty, which drives instability, to make sure that these unstable, ungoverned areas don't become a threat to us, and that we can help make sure that the continent is a more peaceful and prosperous place for those who reside there. So I appreciate the opportunity to have this hearing today. I look forward to your testimony, gentlemen. With that, I will yield back to the Chairman.
Thank you, General McNabb. Your full testimonies, without objection, will be inserted in the record, so you may tell us whatever you feel most appropriate. General.
Chairman McKeon, Congressman Smith, and distinguished members of this committee, it is my distinct privilege to be here today with you representing more than 145,000 of the world's finest logistics professionals. Throughout 2010 and continuing today, the U.S. Transportation Command team of active duty, Guard, Reserve, civilians, merchant mariners, and commercial partners accomplished incredible feats in the face of historic challenges. We have a saying at U.S. Transportation Command: we view our success through the eyes of the warfighter. We've always been about support to the 6 regional combatant commands and their Joint Task Force commanders. Working with the Defense Logistics Agency, the Joint Staff, the services, and the combatant command staffs, our LOG Nation and Transnation teams have provided unparalleled logistic superiority to the regional combatant commanders. From the services and the Joint Forces Command getting the forces ready to go, to the TRANSCOM team delivering the force, to the theater commanders receiving the force, this is the best overall performance I have seen in almost 37 years of service. Sitting next to me is one of our finest warfighters and my good friend, General Carter Ham. I was proud to support him as he commanded military operations over the skies of Libya in Operation Odyssey Dawn, and I look forward to continue to support him as he takes AFRICOM to new and even higher levels. It is he and the other combatant commanders that I am always supporting, and we view our success through their eyes. I feel blessed to be the custodian of one of the nation's greatest asymmetric advantages, our strategic ability to move. Since taking command of U.S. Transportation Command in the fall of 2008, I have been amazed to see some of the unique capabilities inherent in this command. First and foremost is the power of the total force team. Nobody matches up our active duty force with our Guard and Reserve partners like the U.S. Transportation Command. When we called for volunteers to help relieve some of the suffering in Haiti last January, the men and women of the Guard and Reserve stepped up in huge fashion. This included a contingency response group from the Kentucky Guard that was just coming up to speed. During the surge of forces into Afghanistan, we relied heavily on activated C-5 and C-17 crews, maintainers, and aerial porters, and they were crucial to meeting President Obama's deadline to complete the plus-up by 31 August of last year. Most recently, we saw their patriotism in action in responding rapidly to the air refueling requirements in support of the Libyan operations. I'm also in awe of the power of the U.S. flag fleet, in the air, on the seas, and over land. The U.S. flag maritime fleet and their outstanding merchant mariners stepped up during our historic surge last year into Afghanistan and out of Iraq, and we didn't have to activate one ship for either operation, and they delivered. They continue to be key to supplying our forces in Afghanistan, whether coming up through Pakistan or over the Northern Distribution Network. In the air, our commercial partners have continued to meet the demands of the surge in Afghanistan and most recently responded brilliantly to bringing Americans home from Japan following the recent earthquake, tsunami, and nuclear incident. We know the combatant commanders around the world depend on us to deliver the forces and their sustainment day in and day out. From resupply of the South Pole to airdropping food, water, and ammo to a forward operating base in Afghanistan, to delivering fuel to our fighters and bombers and forcing the Libyan no-fly zone, U.S. Transcom delivers. If we do this right, our warfighting commanders do not worry about their logistics lifeline. This is what the Secretary of Defense intended when he made U.S. Transcom the distribution process owner, or DPO, in 2003. He gave the DPO influence over the entire supply chain, from factory to foxhole, and we constantly look for more effective solutions for the warfighter while also being good stewards of the taxpayer's dollar. Since its inception, the DPO has realized over $5.3 billion in savings, and we're still counting. Last year alone, that savings was $1.7 billion. A big part of the savings is taking advantage of lower-cost surface transportation whenever possible. When we match surface to air and commercial to military modes of transportation, we are leveraging our enterprise to maximum advantage for both the warfighter and the taxpayer. We recently saved over $110 million a month moving life-saving mine-resistant all-terrain vehicles to our forces in Afghanistan using a combination of commercial surface and military air. We continue to look for every opportunity to use multimodal operations throughout our global enterprise. My final call out is to the power of the interagency and the joint team. President Obama, in ordering the plus-up of forces in Afghanistan and drawdown in Iraq, set a very tight timeline for our execution. We knew we would need some help increasing capacity on our existing supply lines and help in establishing new supply routes. We took our recommendations to the interagency, and the whole of government came through with excellent results. The National Security Council, ambassadors around the world, the State Department, the Office of the Secretary of Defense, the Maritime Administration, the combatant commands, and the LOG Nation and Transnation teams came together to make logistics magic. This was at a time when we were asked to expand quickly and redirect flow due to an earthquake in the Caribbean that devastated Haiti, which the Chairman alluded to, a volcanic eruption that shut down European airspace for 3 weeks, a coup in the country where we have our main passenger transload operation, the Deep Horizon oil spill in the Gulf, and the worst floods in Pakistan history during the last month of the plus-up. And we still closed everything by 31 August that the President had asked us to do. And our operations continue today at record-breaking pace. We continue to support our forces in Afghanistan and the drawdown in Iraq. We pivoted the transportation enterprise rapidly to support General Ham and the implementation of the no-fly zone over Libya, and we moved out urgently to help with disaster relief in Japan and provide immediate responses to the nuclear incident with special equipment and nuclear specialists from the United States. I could not be more proud of the men and women of the United States Transportation Command. I've flown with our air crews and loaded and moved containers with our stevedores. I've walked through the pallet holding areas with our aerial porters in Afghanistan and explored the cargo holds of our ready reserve fleet with our merchant mariners. Daily, I am amazed and humbled by what our people accomplish. Chairman McKeon, Congressman Smith, and all members of this committee, thank you for your continued superb support of U.S. Transcom and our men and women in uniform. It is my distinct honor and privilege to appear before you today to represent the men and women who are the U.S. Transportation Command and to tell you their story. Again, thank you for taking my written statement for the record, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. General Ham.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Congressman Smith, and members of the committee, and thanks for the opportunity to discuss with you today the accomplishments of the men and women of United States Africa Command. I would like to introduce to the committee Command Chief Master Sergeant Jack Johnson, the command's senior enlisted leader. He and I have only just begun our service together at Africa Command, but I see already that he is exactly the right person to lead several important initiatives and to ensure our service members and their families are well trained and well supported. And I am indeed honored to appear alongside General McNabb, a highly distinguished airman and Joint Force leader. This is a historic time for United States Africa Command. We completed a complex, short-notice operational mission in Libya and have now transferred control of that mission to NATO. The situation in Libya and the conduct of Operation Odyssey Dawn highlight some important matters about Africa. First, this event illustrates the dynamics of the African political military environment. one that has seen the growing threat of transnational extremists in Somalia, election crises, coups, the Southern Sudanese referendum, the scourge of the Lord's Resistance Army, to name just a few of the challenges to security on the continent. In order for Africa Command to reduce threats to our citizens and interests, both abroad and at home, we need to contribute to operations, programs, and activities that help African states provide for their own security in a manner that is consistent with the rule of law and international norms. And we must continue our efforts to enhance regional stability through partnership not only with African states, but also sustained, reliable support to African regional organizations. Africa Command's programs are designed to help prevent conflict, while simultaneously ensuring that the Command is prepared to respond decisively to any crisis when the President so directs, as demonstrated in our conduct of Operation Odyssey Dawn. Secondly, building the coalition to address the situation in Libya was greatly facilitated through the benefits of long-standing relationships and interoperability, this time within NATO. This is the kind of regional approach to security that U.S. Africa Command seeks to foster on the continent. U.S. Africa Command's priority efforts remain building the security capacity of our African partners. We incorporate regional cooperation and pursuit of interoperability in all our programs, activities, and exercises so that our African partners are postured to readily form coalitions to address African security challenges as they arise. Everything U.S. Africa Command has accomplished is the result of the professionalism and dedication of the uniformed and civilian women and men of the Command and our many teammates from across the U.S. government. Their dedicated efforts are a testament to the American spirit and determination and reflects our commitment to contributing to the well-being and security of the people of Africa. Our guiding principles are, first, that a safe, secure, and stable Africa is clearly in the best interest of the United States, and secondly, that we seek to help Africans find solutions to African challenges. I am cognizant that the Command is only able to accomplish its missions with the enduring support of this committee, and I thank you for that, and invite you to come visit us at our headquarters, or better yet, come see us at work in Africa. And Mr. Chairman, I would welcome your questions.
Thank you very much. General McNabb, the ongoing combat operations in Afghanistan and Iraq, the response to the earthquake in Japan, and the President's decision to engage combat forces in Libya are undoubtedly straining the mobility force. Have you reached or are you approaching any red lines in mobility capabilities? What areas of operations concern you the most, and are there any additional resources or assets that could alleviate the stress on the forces and reduce your operational risk?
Sir, right now I think one of the things that hits me is our ability to pivot the transportation enterprise and expand it and contract it using our U.S. flag carriers and our total force. At this point, we've gotten tremendous support from our Guard and Reserve. A lot of them have volunteered to help wherever they can. What I would do next if that's not enough to handle what we're being asked to do worldwide, is then I would have to mobilize some folks, and at this time we do not think we have to do that at the present level. What we have been able to do is, as we've looked at the urgent requirements that we had for Libya and the urgent requirements we had for Japan, we basically stayed in very good close contact with CENTCOM, and we looked for ways or things that we could slow down that they could take a little risk in, primarily sustainment. Decision was made by General Petraeus and General Mattis to increase the sustainment stocks in Afghanistan, and that gave us a little bit of room to be able to say, can we slow this down a little bit till we take care of these emergencies, and then we'll get right back to you. That is the same way we handled Haiti. And so the ability to mix and match is one of the things that I think we bring to the table. At this time, I will say that the Civil Reserve Air Fleet has stepped up to anything that we have asked. I would say that this last couple of weeks, I didn't quite understand how much spring break affects excess capacity, but I will say that that one hit us pretty hard. Next to Christmas and Thanksgiving, spring break is the busiest time for our carriers out there. So as we brought on the order of departure, the voluntary departure coming out of Japan in support of Admiral Willard, getting them back to the States and then getting seats back to their homes was something that was worked very closely with Northcom and with Transcom as we worked through that. Right now, I think that as the Libya operation unfolds, we're watching that carefully. Obviously, if that expands in any way, that would be one where we would be looking to say, do we have enough? Right now, we don't see that. Obviously, there's some other places where there's turmoil. I'll bring the Ivory Coast. You can bring Yemen. All of those operations, we work with CENTCOM or with AFRICOM to sit down and say, okay, how are we going to do this together, doing lots of what-ifs. At this point, I'm looking forward to Afghanistan and Iraq, making sure that we can meet the timelines coming out of Iraq. As Congressman Smith asked me about how do we do that, I would say that coming down from 130,000 to 50,000, that work with General Austin and his people in Iraq, the Armament Material Command under General Dunwoody, really that team has worked superbly, bringing out the extra equipment through Kuwait and through Jordan, getting it washed up, and then putting it on commercial vessels. That's what I was mentioning, that we didn't have to activate any ships to do that. I'm confident that that system is working well, and in fact, making sure which stuff we will leave there, which stuff that we will bring home, which stuff will we send to Afghanistan was what we went through last year. But I'll tell you, the team I think did a superb job, and my portion was just moving it, which was not the hardest part of all of that. When I think about Afghanistan, I would say that we have found the power of intermodal operations that I had mentioned, being able to take it by surface to ports farther, much closer to Afghanistan, and then just jumping the last part using airlift. We are looking for that same capability to be able to bring stuff out of Afghanistan. In other words, same way, bring it out by air to a port nearby and then bring it by surface mode from there. We would like to get dual, be able to go both directions on the Northern Distribution Network. Right now we can only take stuff in. Some countries have not given us permission to bring stuff out of Afghanistan through the Northern Distribution Network, so the interagency and the whole team is working that. I continue to look to say I'd like to make sure that I have lots of options, the Northern Distribution Network, the Pakistan lock, working with General Kiani and the PAC military. We're trying to make sure we do everything we can to make the PAC mill or the PAC lock as smooth as possible. But our ultimate ace in the hole is air, and we're trying to make sure we've taken full advantage of that, working very closely with General Petraeus and his team there.
Thank you.
So, sir, I think that kind of puts it in a nutshell, but I think we're getting there.
Thank you. General Ham, despite the numerous briefings we've received from the administration regarding our military operations in Libya, I think many areas of uncertainty still remain. One question I have is where AFRICOM fits into the command and control structure of NATO enforcement of the no-fly zone and attacks on regime ground targets. General, does AFRICOM have a clear role in the chain of command or targeting boards of Operation Odyssey Dawn, or are you liaising with NATO's Joint Task Force Unified Protector at this point? And what has the reaction of Libya's African neighbors been to our intervention there? Will this operation affect our partnership efforts in the region, in particular Operation Enduring Freedom Trans-Sahara and our efforts against al-Qaeda in the Maghreb?
Chairman, first of all, on the command and control side, at present, with the transition of the operation from U.S. AFRICOM to NATO, NATO now has full operational control of the forces that are actually conducting missions over Libya. So U.S. AFRICOM is presently in a supporting role to Admiral Stavridis, Admiral Locklear, General Bouchard in their efforts. So I don't at present have an operational responsibility. There is always the potential for some U.S. unilateral military missions. One could think of, for example, personnel recovery of a downed pilot or something like that. And if that were to occur, then that would fall to U.S. Africa Command to execute those responsibilities. So with regard to the regional reaction, frankly, it is mixed. as we see that particularly play out in the African Union. Many members, many states in Africa have voiced their support for the United Nations Security Council Resolution 1973, the imposition and the execution of those responsibilities. But frankly, there are other states who did not agree with that UN Security Council resolution. I think, frankly, as we proceed, I'm going to have the responsibility, as I engage with our African partners, of just having a very frank discussion about what U.S. Africa Command's role was, why we did what we did, and just be as truthful and forthright as I can, and just to try to maintain the great relationships that we have with most African states as we move forward. But your point is valid. There is an impact, and there will be an impact within the region.
Thank you very much. Ranking Member Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First question on the Transportation Command. If you could play out a little bit, General McNabb, how things are going in terms of the logistical challenges in Afghanistan that I asked about earlier, working through Pakistan and some of the other areas. Are we able to get what we need in? I know there's major movements now of equipment for the Afghan National Security Force. How is that working, and what are the challenges going forward?
So we presently take in about 35%, and everything that's high value we take in by air. Sometimes that is just that short hop that I was mentioning before from a port that's close in. Sometimes that's all the way from the States, depending on the nature of the stuff going in. It is about, on the surface side, it ends up being about 45% coming through the Pakistan lock, and about 55% of the surface move coming through the Northern Distribution Network. So we've actually adjusted more of the flow to the north, but we are not able to bring military equipment through the NDN. We can only bring that through the Pakistan lock, which gets to your question about FMS for the ANA. We have been working with the Pakistan military to make sure that I've stressed to them how important it is to maintain the velocity going through the Pakistan lock. I continue to work with them to say we can identify if there's any pilferage or attacks and show them where that is taking place and work with them to respond quickly. We still are at less than about 1% pilferage rate on the PAC lock. And so I would say that, of course, if it's your stuff, the 1% is way too much. Right. So we continue to work that hard with Task Force Guardian, which General Petraeus and General Mattis put together. General Thurman made sure, he's the Army Forces Command, he made sure the discipline of what goes on the ground is maintained. From my standpoint, I say if it's really important to you, we put that on the air.
And has the security situation in terms of the Pakistan route gotten better or worse? I know there's concerns about attacks against our supply line coming through Pakistan. What's the update on that?
Sir, it's kind of gone. There's periods where it goes a little higher. I will say in December of 2008 was the time when all of us very much worried. We did not have the Northern Distribution Network at that time. It was 11% was the pilferage and attack rate on it. Since then, it's come down below 1% pretty much for calendar years. But to give you a sense, in July of last year, when the floods were all happening, things started to get stacked up. That's when you slow down the velocity. That's when you become more vulnerable. We went up to about 2% during that month. But overall, for the last year, it was less than 1%.
Okay.
So but again, we keep working at that and making sure that we're looking for every possible way that we can smooth that. A lot of it is just maintaining the velocity on there so it doesn't slow down and become vulnerable. And
created by a bigger target. Thank you. General Ham, just a quick question about Africa. I mentioned that stability is a main challenge there, and in making sure that we do what we can to help create a more stable atmosphere. There's a strong interagency approach that's necessary, State Department, USAID in particular, and elsewhere. I've done a trip across Africa to a variety of different countries a couple years ago, and I know that that's critical to being able to be successful, is to leverage your assets in cooperation with the State Department. Can you talk to us a little bit about how that interagency process works country to country in Africa and how you see that as part of your mission there?
Yes, sir, absolutely. With the design of United States Africa Command, there was a recognition I think early on that the problem set that you just identified was key, that it is about instability, and it does require a whole-of-government approach to advance U.S. interests on the continent. And with that in mind, the command headquarters was designed with a considerable amount of interagency support. So we look at our headquarters in Stuttgart, which is not surprisingly, overwhelmingly Department of Defense, but we have 12 other government agencies who are represented at some pretty senior levels, to include a deputy to the commander who is a very experienced and senior Foreign Service officer, former ambassador. We have senior representatives from USAID, from Treasury, from Commerce, and many other organizations to help us look at the challenges, the security challenges in Africa through more than just a military lens. And that helps us, first of all, better define the problem so that we can then, in concert with our interagency partners, bring to bear, ideally, the whole of government, the various assets that different branches bring, to help African states build the secure environment that they need to build. Our aspect of that is again very largely weighted toward the military, but the other aspects of government are key. The second point, Congressman, that I would say is we work very, very closely with the chiefs of mission in the countries, and of course they are the senior Americans in each of those countries. We make sure that all of our efforts are nested with the ambassador and with the country team, which are inherently interagency, and we think that that works to our best effect.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Bartlett.
Thank you both very much for your testimony, your long service, and your stellar performance. I have a lot of questions about our Libya involvement, which I believe is both unconstitutional and illegal. But these are policy questions, and I know yours is not to reason why, yours is but to do and die. So I will avoid the temptation to ask you questions which you cannot answer by yielding my time to our most junior member here at Gavel Fall, which was Mr. West.
Well, thank you, Mr. Bartlett, and also thank you, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Ranking Member. And Generals, it's good to see you. And General Ham, always great to see you. First of all, General McNabb, strategic maneuverability has always been the great thing about our force and our country. But what I'd like to do is look out ahead maybe about 5 years. And when you look at the fact that we're moving more so from a forward deployed type of military force more so to a power projection or a forcible entry type of force. What do you see the challenges, 5 years and beyond for the Transportation Command? Because I know one of the things I'm very concerned about is our C-17 fleet.
Well, Congressman, thanks for that. I couldn't agree more with the value of the strategic mobility capability. And I would say that we are being pushed, especially as you think about global operations and we think about how we are headed as a department. I would tell you, first and foremost, that new tanker was my #1 acquisition priority, and the fact that the tanker allows us to put global mobility, reach, and power is what that's all about. And that new tanker will allow us to make sure that we can extend out and we can really change the way we do our concept of operations and be much more efficient in that. So that's huge. And the faster we can get the tanker on board, the better from my standpoint. Right now we do some things by brute force, for instance, do transload using C-17s, moving pallets and people, and that's not what C-17s do best. They do air assault or air drop, and that has grown a lot as we've gotten into Afghanistan. We've gone from 2 million pounds of airdrop in 2005 to 60 million pounds last year, and we're headed towards 100 million pounds of airdrop. And what that allows us to do is to get out there to the forward operating bases and make sure they get what they need without having to put convoys at unnecessary risk. I think that we are pushing very hard to be able to have some of these intermodal, multimodal locations, places like Rhoda, places like Suda, places like Suda Bay, places like Camp La Manier in Djibouti. As I look to the Pacific, the same thing, Guam, Singapore, Diego Garcia. And if I have those places where I can get large stuff into and then have theater response, whether that's the Joint High-Speed Vessel, whether that's C-17s or 130s doing airdrop, or whether that's even as we look at hybrid airships, if we can get to the point where we can get that stuff to these major ports by surface and then have options for the theater commanders out there depending on the nature, we really will have gone a long way. That's the part that I'm looking at now because that's big dollar savings, and it's also very, very fast. That includes not only our float prepositioning, but what do we preposition on the land. So you can imagine giving those options to the theater commanders out there, and I think that will be very useful to them. So those are the things that I'm looking at and really asking all of the theater commanders is where do you want me to look at those intermodal locations, and let's work those now. The investments in places like Diego Garcia, like in Rota, like in Suda Bay have already paid big dividends for us. And we're finding that the power of that has actually increased the velocity into the warfighter because oftentimes in those small places, it is not the number of airplanes, it's what we can get in the throughput into those small bases. And that's where the C-17, as you mentioned, has paid so, has really, really played well. I get to fly the C-17, and I'll tell you, it is an awesome airplane. When I go fly with those young guys at Altus and those young instructors, and, I've got 5,600 hours, they'll come over and put their arm around me and say, come on over here, son, let me show you how we fly this airplane. And so they really have taken this and taken it to a whole different level. So lots of great opportunities. The C-5M is performing very well. That's the re-engined C-5s. And as we get the C-130Js on board and the C-130 avionics modernization program on the C-130H models, you've really set us up with modern airplanes that we can really throw in there very quickly and really can make a difference.
Well, thanks, sir. And if I could ask one other question. General Ham, as we sit back, as Ranking Member Smith talked about the unrest and the political instability in Africa, do you see an encroachment of any al-Qaeda type of elements? And also, I'd like to get your assessment of China's interventions into the African continent as well.
Thanks, Congressman. If I could take the second piece first, the Chinese are very active across the continent, but primarily in an economic way, and I'm learning more about that as I get further into the command. And I would note that tomorrow would be four weeks, so I have a lot yet to learn about this. But I see the Chinese influence primarily in an economic vein, with construction, with oil, and the like. Your first point about al-Qaeda and more broadly violent extremist organizations in Africa is indeed the #1 security challenge that we face in Africa, and I would say most notably in East Africa, where we see the efforts of al-Shabaab in Somalia in attempting to expand their reach more regionally, with linkages with al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula and Yemen, and potentially linkages with al-Qaeda in the lands of the Islamic Maghreb. All of those I think, pose a very, very real strategic concern to the United States, our people, and our interests, both abroad and at home. So I take that as our #1 mission and our #1 area of emphasis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mrs. Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you both for your distinguished service. I wanted to follow up a little on the interagency question, because I think over the years we have acknowledged that the military operations and interface probably will always overshadow to a certain extent in many of the areas in which we're engaged, we're involved. Are there some metrics? Are there some areas that you're really looking at to see whether, in fact, that has changed dramatically, and what has really contributed to that change? Are we, in fact, seeing that military operations or the activities per se are really not getting in the way of some of the diplomatic efforts that we've had ongoing?
Yes, ma'am. I think for us in Africa Command, the operations in Libya were certainly a different nature, a different type of the operation, and those, while we're certainly an overwhelmingly military aspect of the U.S. application of power. More commonly throughout Africa, U.S. Africa Command is operating in a supporting role. In most cases, supporting Chief of Mission initiatives or Department of State-led initiatives. It is principally through Department of State authorities that building partner capacity, security institution building is done through state authorities, though DOD and through U.S. Africa Command has a supporting role in that regard. A good example is the development of forces from Uganda, Burundi, who operate in the African mission in Somalia under a State Department program that U.S. Africa Command supports. So I think we have the balance about right in terms of who's in charge. The Department of Defense, and again through U.S. Africa Command, we bring a lot of capacity and a lot of ability to enable those programs, but by and large we are doing so in support of others, and that seems to me to be about right for most of the programs in Africa.
Mm-hmm. Are you checking in, I guess, fairly frequently to be sure that that everybody agrees? I think that balance, where it's appropriate, obviously there are areas that you pointed out, of course, where the balance is not appropriate. But I think I think it was the trips that I took actually with our ranking chairman, where despite the fact that we talked about how important it was, in fact, the people who were engaged in this effort didn't feel that they had the same seat at the table.
I think that's a very real concern, and something that I would tell you that I'll take a look at as I get my feet under me in this new command. I will, as I've told Assistant Secretary Carson of the Africa Bureau, State Department, that most of the time when I come back to D.C., I'll make an effort to see him, as he is pledged to come see me on the continent or in Germany. I think it's very, very important that we have that very strong linkage to make sure that all of the assets of the government get a voice and an important voice as we move forward.
Thank you, sir. May I just, you noted, I think, two areas in which you're reaching out to military families, particularly in Stuttgart, I think, that where they've had some questions and some problems. How else are you able to make certain that our military families feel that they have the support that they need in that command? And some of those are accompanied, I believe, and the majority, I suspect, are probably not accompanied, certainly in Djibouti, where we have some forces there.
Yes, ma'am. The quality of life for our service members who are at the headquarters in Stuttgart and in our service component commands who are largely based in Europe with one here in the U.S., those families have excellent support. I do worry more so about the small contingents that are either in our embassies, kind of separated away, that they have, that the military service members and families have the programs that they need, but generally that's pretty good. And at places like Camp Lemonnier, which is a pretty large deployment of unaccompanied service members, again, thanks to this committee, they actually have some very good quality of life. It's never as good as being separated, but it is quite good.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Generals, thank you for being here today. And General Ham, I am very familiar that the Southern Command is located in Miami, and we know that the people of my birthplace, Charleston, South Carolina, have a keen interest in the potential of AFRICOM being located in Charleston. And we would, if my colleagues, Congressman Tim Scott, Congressman Jim Clyburn were here, they would want to make a few points to you, and that is that Charleston is the transportation hub for the United States Transportation Command, as well as the primary seaport for container traffic between the United States and the South Atlantic. The Charleston Air Force Base provides all the strategic airlift support for Africa for our government, to include embassy support. SPAWAR Charleston is the leading provider for command, control, and communications for EUCOM's role in Africa. the relationships for the Charleston medical community, which would be so helpful in the event of an emergency in Africa. The Medical University of South Carolina is located in Charleston, a world-class facility. We know that most of the rapid deployment forces that would be used in an African operation include special operations that are in the southeastern part of the United States. Charleston is the hub for all military transportation, airlift, sea lift, and prepositioning to Africa. And then there's an extraordinary cultural linkage. I had the privilege of visiting in Monrovia, Liberia, and the great cultural association of West Africa to Charleston is very clear. It's a shared culture. In fact, we have the same accents, and I felt right at home when I was visiting with the people in Monrovia. And then I found out, to my pleasant surprise, that the Diocese of the African American Methodist Church for South Carolina is actually South Carolina and Liberia, and it sponsors the AME University there in Monrovia. And so with that in mind, the decision Secretary Gates has indicated to be made for moving Africa Command or retaining it won't be considered until next year. But when the decision is made, what are the considerations that will be made as to quality of life for dependents, access to schools, jobs, medical care? What do you see?
Well, Congressman, first I would say I've only had the opportunity to visit Charleston once, but it was just a few years ago, and it was indeed a very enjoyable visit to a great city. As you mentioned, the Secretary of Defense has asked me to take a look at and provide a recommendation back to him as to what should the stationing of the Africa Command headquarters be. And he's essentially asked me to start from a clean sheet of paper and look at the factors that you've identified: security, suitability, quality of life, transportation nodes, accessibility to the area of responsibility, the whole host of requirements that we would like to station our headquarters. And so that process has begun, and we will look at, first of all, make sure we've got the methodology right, and then we will look at a wide variety of locations to see which we think would make be most suitable for the command to accomplish its missions. But it'll take us a little bit of time to do that study.
Well, you've indicated you visited Charleston once. You are welcome back, obviously, and you will see such a symbiotic relationship with West Africa to the low country of South Carolina, and the people there are very proud of the shared culture. But then, obviously, all the other features that I told you, and I know that if Congressman Scott were here or Congressman Clyburn, they would want to make that point. And General McNabb, is my final question in regard to refitting rail cars. What's the status of refitting old rail cars as opposed to buying new?
Yes, sir. Our Surface Deployment and Distribution Command has been looking at that and have basically decided that refurbishing old probably makes the more sense from a business case. Right now, we've been asked by the OSD to take a look and say, okay, given everything going on, what should that number be? 4,000, 5,000, where should that be in there? And right now they are doing that study with OSD. And
to conclude, there's a bit of history there too. Where retrofitting occurs in South Carolina is in the community of Hamburg, South Carolina. It was the site of the first scheduled railroad in the world between Charleston and Hamburg in 1832. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And to Mr. Wilson, I would comment that when I've been to South Carolina, Charleston, I've enjoyed myself in that area. But I would also point everyone out or point everyone to the fact that I live in the Atlanta, Georgia area, which is the transportation hub of the Southeast. We've got the world's busiest airport. It's high capacity. We have approximately quite a few military aviation facilities. We've got one of the country's largest diaspora communities from Africa. Superb infrastructure to support the military's communication needs. World-class educational institutions, Georgia Tech, Emory, the Atlanta University Center. High quality of life for personnel who were assigned or who would be assigned to that area. And I think that it would be a great thing. I know that Ambassador Andrew Young is very much interested in AFRICOM choosing to locate its headquarters in Atlanta, and I certainly join in that desire. If not Atlanta, then someplace in Georgia would be great. But I want to also congratulate you, General Ham, for your new assignment. 4 weeks in. I know that you're still trying to get adjusted, and it seems like you came in at a time of great action going on in Africa. The Libyan situation, we've got situation in the Ivory Coast, and I understand that the President Gbagbo has resigned and is asking for UN assistance or UN protection, actually. And that's good that he will be moving on. I would like to ask you, are U.S. personnel or equipment taking part in the UN operations in the Ivory Coast?
Congressman, we are not. We are in very close dialogue with the U.S. Embassy and also with the French, who have a large presence in Cote d'Ivoire. As we typically do in the U.S. military, we plan for possible contingencies, and as the chairman mentioned, you know, the security situation in Cote d'Ivoire had been deteriorating for some period of time. So we looked at a whole range of possible military actions that might be necessary. But we have the people at the embassy are present. The ambassador has asked for a small coordinating team just to maintain communications, and we've got that available to him as well. Your information is probably a little more current than mine, but as I was departing the Pentagon to come over here, we were at the situation where Mr. Gbagbo had indicated his apparent willingness to turn himself over, but that had not yet been accomplished by the time I left. But hopefully that will be accomplished in a calm return to Abidjan and to the country. It's sorely needed.
Thank you, sir. And would you also update us on the progress towards increasing the professionalism and accountability of the forces in the Democratic Republic of Congo?
Yes, sir. It's an ongoing effort. We have trained 1 battalion. We think that 1 battalion will perform pretty well, but we think there's more that we can and should be doing to help Congo become a more professional military force subordinate to civil control and responding under international norms. But initial indications are pretty good, I think, but still certainly some work to be done.
Thank you, General McNabb. I had questions, but Congressman Wilson kind of threw me off track there, so I'll get back to you at some point in the future. Thank you, gentlemen, for your service to the nation.
Thank you. The Chair recognizes Mr. Klein for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And with all apologies to my colleagues from South Carolina and Georgia, most everybody knows that Minneapolis-St. Paul is roughly the transportation center of the entire world. General McNabb, I've got a copy of a letter that you sent to Mr. Babbitt, the FAA administrator, where you were expressing some concerns about a proposed rule that will affect crew rest for our commercial partners. Could you briefly outline what your concerns are and what impact this rule might have on our ability to move troops and personnel?
Sure. Yes, Congressman. Actually, Mr. Babbitt did come out, Administrator Babbitt did come out and visit with me at Transcom. Also visited with the Air Mobility Command, and we chatted about what this impact would have on our Civil Reserve Air Fleet, especially the non-scheduled carriers. So the legacy carriers, kind of a separate issue, but the non-scheduled carriers that primarily do the charter work, not only for us, but for others. As I mentioned to him, I said safety is paramount. There is no question that
Yes, sir, but what would the impact be? What is your concern here?
Sir, the biggest concern has to do with, as you get modern airplanes, when you think about basically one size doesn't fit all. When you talk about regional carriers, they're doing a number of landings versus long international legs. They have different levels of fatigue, and they require different approaches. When you talk about the non-scheduled carriers, they are taking stuff directly from the United States, and ideally, with modern airplanes, going all the way to Afghanistan, not stopping on the way. It's taking advantage of that. Ideally, I've been pushing hard for the modern airplanes that have the longer range. That increases velocity. It also means we don't have to worry about stopping in some of those locations. It allows this thing to go very rapidly. So I asked them that take a look at that. Take a look at better crew rest facilities, better operational risk management types things that say, let's look at this kind of unique part of this mission and make sure that we enhance safety, but look at all the ways that we can do that.
So if I may interrupt again just for a minute, this proposed rule would take away that flexibility. And what I'm trying to get at, the impact would be we would move fewer troops, we would take more time, we could move less equipment. What was the impact of this rule be?
Well, certainly it's time, and certainly it is dollars. And what I'm probably the most, what I want to make sure is our U.S. flag fleet stays competitive. And if we don't take full advantage of modern airplanes, especially on the international market, we will find ourselves not in that market. And I'm very worried about that because I depend on those. I am too, General. Thank you. Thank you very much. If there's anything this committee can do, I trust you will communicate that to us. General Ham, I want to go back to the command structure for Operation Unified Protector, and I have a little thing here from Admiral Stavridis, I think, NATO. Sort of a command structure outline in it, and it says that we've got apparently Lieutenant General Jodis, American, Vice Admiral Ronaldo Veri, in fact I should put my glasses on, I'm sorry, an Italian, and we've got a Canadian Lieutenant General, and they're reporting to Admiral Stavridis, Supreme Allied Commander Europe. You should have lobbied for a title like that. The question is, how do you see your relationship as a commander of AFRICOM as the same as General Mattis's is to General Petraeus and Admiral Stavridis, or we're trying to fit. The chairman asked you about that relationship, and you said that there might be a uniquely American operation where presumably you insert yourself into this chain of command and take U.S. forces and use them for, in your example, it was a pickup of a downed pilot or something else. Help me understand what your relationship is to this, I know you don't have this, but to this command structure that I just described, which is a NATO command structure.
Sir, it is quite analogous to what you described in Afghanistan, where in Afghanistan, Admiral Stavridis, in his NATO role, overseeing General Petraeus, a NATO commander, supported by General Mattis, a United States geographic combatant commander. And so that relationship is very similar to what we have here, where I do not have a day-to-day operational role, but Libya is in the area of responsibility of U.S. Africa Command, so we have obviously an enduring interest. And when Operation Unified Protector is complete, when the alliance decides that its missions have been accomplished, then Libya is still in Africa Command's area of responsibility. So I remain very closely connected with Admiral Stavridis, Admiral Locklear, and indeed the Canadian General Bouchard, who's a very competent commander.
Okay. Thank you very much. I yield back.
Thank you. The chair recognizes the gentlelady from Florida, Mrs. Castor, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome, Generals. General McNabb, I think many of the personnel in U.S. Transportation Command are something of unsung heroes. I mean, they do it all, from the intricate and complex deliveries of supplies across the globe to air refueling to deployments and redeployments, and then you have the disaster response and all of the aeromedical assignments that you have. I don't think you get enough kudos, so my hat's off to all of the personnel in U.S. Transportation Command.
Thank you.
I know that one of the primary issues for TRANSCOM has been the ongoing saga of the KCX air refueling tanker, and we've finally reached a point now where we can all move ahead and they can focus on actually building, engineering and building those aircraft. How do you keep the KCX on time and on budget?
Yes, ma'am. Well, first of all, obviously the Air Force will, I depend on the Air Force under their organized, train, and equip role to be able to be overseeing that and making sure that it stays on time and on budget.
But you can bring some added attention to General Schwartz and the Air Force, and I want to hear whether or not you have the ability to do that.
Yes, ma'am. And I think that right now they've made that that was their #1 acquisition priority, just like it was mine. I really do appreciate the tremendous support on both sides of the Hill on getting us that new tanker, and I am absolutely excited about what it will bring. I think that the fact that it's primarily off the shelf in general, taking advantage of what is already a commercial market, making sure that we're not asking for things that are beyond the reach in technology. I mean, a lot of the things that usually will drive something to increase cost or time, delay in time, most of that stuff has been worked out. So I'm pretty excited about that, and it seems to me as long as we keep a stable program, that we'll be able to deliver that on time. And, hopefully we'll be cranking those out at 15 plus a year, and then we can begin to replace those old 135s that have done such a great job.
Yeah, the mechanics that have worked on, that continue to work on some of the Eisenhower era tankers are magicians, I think, sometimes. What role has TRANSCOM played in support of the humanitarian relief to the earthquake victims in Japan? Could you give us a quick summary on that, and whether or not it has placed stress on our mobility system?
Yes, ma'am. We've had 512 sorties, moved about 306 packs into there to help. Primarily, those are those radiological teams and other teams that have went in. Moved.
And are these teams and assets? Are they in that area? Could you distinguish? How far are you having to travel? Or do you have the ability to respond with assets that are close in?
Well, certainly, Admiral Willard is using his own forces that are already in theater, and you've seen them. You've seen the amphibious groups. You've seen the Marines come up from Kadena. You have seen the 7th Fleet, the naval assets come in. Obviously, we have a number of airmen that are over there at different bases like Yokota and Misawa, and he's taking full advantage of all of that. Where he has asked us to help is the stuff coming from the continental United States, or for emergency movement in theater that they can't handle themselves. We have moved, for instance, crash rescue teams, the Fairfax rescue team from here, the LA crash rescue team, and this is not only to go into the rubble, but also dog teams that deployed with them. We moved emergency generators, a plane load, 65 emergency generators, as the generators were taken out by the tsunami for the nuclear plant. We also moved a plane load of boron to neutralize the radioisotopes. So we've been doing things like that, kind of the emergency. This is stuff that we need from the state. A lot of radiological teams, whether they were survey teams or chemical, biological, radiological teams, we brought those on. And basically what Northern Command, Admiral Winnefeld did when this came up, said, here are the teams that they might need. We leave that to Admiral Willard. I make sure that I have airplanes that are on standby alert and air refueling assets to take it as soon as it's identified, and once it's identified, we go pick them up and take them. We also did aided in the voluntary departure of all of the U.S. people.
Has it provided any kinks in your ability to complete missions anywhere else?
Ma'am, the only thing that we had a bit of discussion is how quickly they needed to move the voluntary departure. We decided that we would do that all commercial. We went to our U.S. flag carriers like you were mentioning. Spring break did have a play because there wasn't excess capacity, and they basically responded very quickly. That allowed us to keep the T-tails supporting General Ham in AFRICOM, General Petraeus and General Mattis in CENTCOM, at the same time of having those T-tails available to take any of that emergency nuclear response stuff immediately in there. So again, our commercial partners really stepped up magnificently, and by the time it's over, brought out about 5,000 passengers, over 400 pets. And then we also got commercial tickets on the scheduled missions that were coming out of Japan to get the folks home, and then we worked with Northcom to get them to their final destination.
Thank you very much.
You're very welcome, ma'am.
Thank you. The gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Kaufman, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, General McNabb, thanks for the job that you're doing as a Commanding General for U.S. Transportation Command. A question about Afghanistan, and that is, you mentioned that you want to get the C-17 more in its primary mission, as you define it, to do the airborne drops, the logistical support. But I understand that there's been some problems with accuracy, getting that inside the drop zone. Could you respond to that?
Sir, I think you're probably talking about the precision airdrop system, where we drop it at 10 or 15,000 feet, and it has a GPS receiver and a square chute, and it comes in. And the biggest issue with that was the terrain and the winds. And obviously it has got to be able to keep up with those kinds of things. So we've worked with industry to make sure that we continue to drive in the accuracy that they need on the ground. Because of the conditions, primarily we've been able to do visual flight rule type drops, low altitude, low cost, using disposable type chutes. That has been the primary amount that we have done, and normal container delivery system. That's the primary way that we have been doing that. I actually got to fly a airdrop 40 bundles where we dropped from a C-17 that we dropped up in the mountains at night. They use a night vision goggles. They've worked out very well with the folks on the ground. And when you're coming in at 1,000 to 2,000 feet, the accuracy is within the standards that they need. So we've been, the 93 to 94% accuracy on putting the stuff on target. We are even looking at doing low altitude, high speed airdrop, much like the special operators do. The C-17 and the 130J are stressed to be able to do that, and that's where you'd come in at 250 knots at 300 feet. But we have to make sure we design, and we're really looking for an ability to size this and keep the cost down. But it's obviously has to do with the parachute and the opening shock. Those are the kinds of things that we continue to work to say, can we do it as cheap as possible, depending on the threat, all the way to putting a precision airdrop that ideally we'd like to recover and reuse.
Thank you. And General Ham, thanks for your service to our country and and congratulations on your recent command for taking over U.S. Africa Command. First of all, can you just share with me what the rationale was for putting it in Stuttgart, Germany, when Central Command was your predecessor, and it deals with an area geographically further away than Africa, and yet they're in Florida?
Yes, sir. Africa had been divided between European Command, which had the bulk of Africa, Central Command, which had the Horn of Egypt and the Horn of Africa, and Pacific Command, which had the island nations and Madagascar. So there actually were 3 geographic combatant commands previously that divided the continent. But the majority was in European Command. And so when the decision was made to stand up Africa Command as a separate geographic command, the bulk of the resources were already in Stuttgart. The facilities were already in Stuttgart. So for purposes of getting the command off to an expeditious start, that seemed to make a lot of sense.
I understand. Now, in the situation in Ivory Coast right now, where you have a constitutionally elected government that is not being permitted to assume the government, and you have a president-elect there that has not been allowed to assume his position in the government, that there's not been a peaceful transfer of power. Were there any communications between that president-elect and you, or in your command, in reference to any assistance?
No, sir. Only through the U.S. Embassy, but it was specifically focused on U.S. missions, for example, planning for a non-combatant evacuation.
I see. So there virtually no communication whatsoever, no, from this constitutionally elected government that was not able to assume power to provide any assistance whatsoever.
Sir, not with Africa Command, to the very best of my knowledge.
Well, what how would you define your mission in Africa? Because if you cannot influence that situation in any way, tell me how you define your mission.
Sir, in Cote d'Ivoire, there was already a very large United Nations presence, and focused on this. Clearly, there were efforts underway through a variety of international and regional organizations to try to seek a solution to this other than through the application of military force. My sense is that proceeded over the past couple of days as violence escalated. We saw the United Nations take a more forceful role, and I think that's what perhaps compelled Mr. Gbagbo to decide that it was time to change. I think the best role that Africa Command plays in these situations is to try to prevent them, to try to work with the militaries and security forces of African states so that they are loyal to the duly elected and constituted government, which is not something we saw play out in this situation where we had forces loyal to both the duly elected president and to the man who would not relinquish power. So I think we can be more preventive rather than the application of military power to displace the application of U.S. military power to displace someone in an African state.
Thank you, General. The gentlelady from Hawaii is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Generals, for being here. General McMahon, I was wondering, because of others who have testified before us, there's always seems to be this interesting relationship between the National Guard and reserves as making up your force. Do you also have that combination?
Yes, ma'am.
And do you know what your numbers are in terms of how many are active and how many of the reserves or National Guard supplement you?
It's about 60% are in the Guard and Reserve, and about 40% in the active. Would be a rough depending on what weapon system, and of course you've got a great team out there in Hawaii. General Wong and his team have been superb, and figured out new ways that we can take full advantage of the total force, sharing airplanes and figuring out the best way to use the Guard and active duty. It's really been very positive.
Thank you for saying that. I'm really curious about whether you have had any problems with, I think it's Article 10, Title 10 and Title 32, because as you know, the Guard really is a state function, sure. Reports and appointed by the Adjutant General, is appointed by the Governor, and how do you work out the chain of command, I guess, for lack of a better description?
Certainly, when they are flying a federal mission, obviously they get paid for that, and when they do that, they come onto our orders, and then they use our normal chain of command. They do some Guard missions in which they stay under the Governor's command and control. I would say that especially on the mobility side, I am very, very happy with how that all works. But it's fairly simple given the fact that we give them a mission, they fly it, and they get paid for that. It works out well overall, and it's a little easier for us, especially on the airlift side. Tanker the same way. For the most part, any time that we've had a national emergency, I've never once had a governor say, well, I'm holding the tankers back or the 130s or the C-17s, not once. They always know that this is part of this. Where we really get into, you really see the value is for a domestic disaster like Katrina, and at that point, how do we make sure that we're using not only the Guard Bureau but our support to Northcom and making sure that that all comes together. And I would say that that has gone very well. We saw that in Haiti. Really some very, very good work in making sure that General McKinley, as the National Guard Bureau chief, and us working through that, it really has not been a problem.
So what about, you testified earlier about Japan and the amount of support that you've had to coordinate. Is any of that support coordinated to the respective Guard units and or reserves units? In this case, we definitely had some of the people flying the missions, but they're flying there, they're flying back, and it's a specific mission in which they're doing that. The rest of them, I'm not sure how much of the Guard would be on those chemical, biological, and radiological teams that Northcom has that we move. I'd have to get that for the record for you. Have you also had occasion to call into service like commercial planes or commercial ships or anything like that? And what's the process that you go through to do that? Yes, ma'am. In fact, we have a very robust process. And in fact, if we can go first to our commercial industry, our U.S. flag fleet, that's what I will do. If that can handle it, because they can do it cheaper than we could do for the military side. So I try to focus the military on places where the threat or the conditions require military-type lift. And if the commercial can do it, I will turn to them first. They have really helped us tremendously on the surge into Afghanistan, the bringing the equipment out of Iraq. All of that has been done, the commercial. How are they cheaper? I'm curious. How are they cheaper? Well, if you do look at fully burdened costs and you say, okay, here's how much it cost me to take a pallet of stuff on a C-17 versus a 747-400 freighter, you look at the efficiencies that they've got in the commercial world, it ends up being a cheaper way to do that. That frees the C-17 to go do airdrop. So when I sit there and I think about that, that has been one of the real powers that I've seen in TRANSCOM is the use of both the air and the maritime industry wherever possible. And that has allowed us to handle a lot of these surges that you all have asked about, is the fact that we've brought the U.S. flag fleet to bear. We basically contract with them. And it is U.S. flag? Yes, ma'am. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. The gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Scott, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. General McNabb, General Ham, I represent Robins Air Force Base, and just to the south of me I have Moody, and just to the west I have Fort Benning, just to the east I have Stewart. Both of the Air Force and the Army are extremely important to us, and as you look for additional commands, I think Georgia will be you will find open and welcome arms there. I want to ask a question. The Joint Future Theater Lifter, is that going to be a vertical lift craft?
Congressman, we're looking at all parts. Vertical lift is one of that. One is fixed wing, which Air Mobility Command had brought in, kind of a much more modern C-17-130 type aircraft. We also are looking at airships under that to say, how does that fit into the overall enterprise that we have? And what we're trying to do is sort that out. And I will say we're going to look at, what does it cost per pound delivered, and then how does that fit into the rest of the fleets that we have? And I use surface, I will use rail, we'll use trucks, I'll look at airships, and we'll just see how that will fit into the rest of those. Vertical lift is one of those ways. Vertical lift in the past has been probably the most expensive way. So when we think about ways that we can help General Petraeus and General Mattis, one of the things is if I can free up his vertical lift assets to go do the operational type missions that only they can do by doing whether it's airdrop or air land, that's what I try to do, because historically that's just a much more expensive way. When I look for the future, that may change those dynamics as technology takes over, and I think that's what we're looking for.
Okay. If just looking at the history of things, it never made sense to me why we canceled the F-22 before the F-35 is ready. And the tanker, it takes us a decade to get through that. And now we have the C-17, and in stopping the purchase of the C-17. And of all the decisions that I've seen, and again, I don't pretend to think that I know as much as you do, General, but of all the decisions I've seen made, the one that I question the most as far as our abilities going forward is canceling the C-17 buy. And it's not manufactured in my district. I mean, it's not, but this is my question. If we cancel the C-17 buying altogether, knowing the history of the procurements and that it may be 20 years before there's an alternative to the C-17 that actually works. We've already paid for the technology cost of the plane. We can, what alternatives do you see for future airlift production if our last remaining wide-body military production program shuts its doors and closes? And how would we replace those aircraft if we end up in a situation where they do come under fire and we do actually start to lose some of them?
Yes, sir. Sir, I will tell you the C-17 has performed magnificently, and it really has changed the way we did airlift, because it can swing between strategic and theater roles, and as you mentioned, it has been tremendous. Right now, we're set to have 222 C-17s. I would say that when we did the MCRS, we figured we need about 300. It was 304 large strategic airlifters, and right now that was made up of C-17s, C-5Ms, which were re-engined, and C-5As that had the avionics modernization program on there. And what I basically, from Transcom standpoint, we need about 32.7 million ton miles. And as the Air Force looks at what's the best mix of those airplanes, that's where the C-17, C-5 mix came up. From my standpoint, one of the things that I'm very excited about is as we get the new tanker, and right now I use C-17s in ways that I would rather be using the new multi-role tanker in. And that will free up C-17s to do some of the other work. I think that's going to be a positive all by itself, and it's one of those things that folks don't realize the impact that we have on having to use C-17s to transload from our Civil Reserve Air Fleet, both cargo and packs, because I can't take them all the way forward. When I think about the future, and you make a very good point. One, I think they're planning to make sure that they keep the tooling. I mean, I think that gives you a hedge. The other portion I would say is we look at these new, like as you mentioned, as we look at the new study, what are the other things that we need to do, and then again, how will that mix and match? When I first was working as a major on the C-17 and talking about when we needed it, at that point we were going to buy 210 C-17s to replace the C-141 fleet. We're at 222 now. I would say we have the numbers. Most of the places that we go now, I would just say that we're not impacted by the numbers of airplanes. It's how many airplanes can I get in there. And so that tends to be where I look at the C-17 fleet. Its versatility has been superb. The other portion that I think we're doing better than ever is using our Civil Reserve Air Fleet, again, modern airplanes, and making sure that we're using those to max advantage. So again, we free up the fleet to make sure that they do that. But I do understand your concern, and I would say that I have the same concern to make sure that we have hedged those bets and we have options to be able to bring that back if we need to.
Well, my concern is that we start finding stress fractures and other things that it takes us longer to repair them, and at the same time we can't bring new equipment in.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir.
Thank both of you.
Gentlelady from Guam is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I'd also like to welcome General McNabb and General Ham. Thank you for your testimonies. Well, earlier you heard my colleagues speak about the great attributes of their states. Well, I represent the beautiful island of Guam. And if I were to tell you about all the advantages of living on a tropical island, it would take all day. So we'll put it off for another time. But Guam is the home of Andersen Air Force Base and Naval Base. I have 2 questions for you, General McNabb. The first is for you in reference to ship repairs in U.S. shipyards. In a May 2004 report to Congress, MSC assured Congress that it was firmly committed to conducting the maximum amount of repair work practicable in domestic shipyards and ensuring that MSC ships are repaired in foreign shipyards only when directed by operational necessity and allowed by law. How does TRANSCOM ensure that operational necessity exists before authorizing repairs in foreign shipyards? An annual report to Congress indicates that there are still a tremendous amount of ships being repaired in Hong Kong or Singapore. So what more can be done to comply with congressional intent? Could you answer that for me?
Oh, yes, ma'am. One of the things that Military Sealift Command is not only do they take care of our surge ships, they also take care of the Navy fleet. And the ships that they have forward, for instance, in the Pacific, are primarily under the Chief of Naval Operations hats. In other words, it's the support of the Navy. The ships that they take care of for me are the large medium-speed railroad ships that we would activate if we can't, get the commercial lift to be able to do that. And right now we haven't had to be activating these large ships because the commercial capability has been there. I know that they are committed to using Guam. I know Admiral Busby, the MSC commander, has, and I believe, talked with you and gone through this with you, and it had to do with the dry dock, I think, there in Guam. And so whatever we can do to get that dry dock up, because right now that is the constraint, as I understand it, the big constraint in 11. We do $40 million. Guam is probably the place that we do. He does most of the work, but not under my, not under my umbrella. It's really under the CNO.
I see. Well, I am very concerned because we have, about 350 workers, employees there. It's a private shipyard, and it was one of the things that I fought for a few years ago. Okay. Buy America.
Yes, ma'am.
So I want to be sure that that is being carried out. Now, my final question is also for you, General McNabb, and it's in regards to rotating aircraft support on Guam. Our rotating aircraft, which in the past has been called the Patriot Express, helps to enhance morale and welfare for service members in Guam by offering them flights to, say, Japan or Hawaii. What steps is TRANSCOM taking with either the Navy or the Air Force to bring back this capability to Guam? And can you explain to me what is necessary to revisit this issue and validate the requirements for this important capability?
Yes, ma'am. On the Patriot Express, what we have done with that, and that primarily is to move the U.S. military members around and their families when they're moving back and forth. It also has the other benefit that if you have it, then there's space available opportunities for dependents and families, which I think is one of the real advantages to that. When we've actually increased the number of Patriot Express missions, adding back Korea, adding back Misawa, adding back Iwakuni, and the promise that I've had with the commanders in those areas that you've got to make sure you fill those airplanes because we have to break even at the end of all of this. Guam is slated to be and I'll have to get you whether it's next year, it may even be, it's probably 12, but it might even be 11. But we said, especially as the Marines would come down there and we got additional number of military folks on Guam, then it will make sense to have Patriot Express come in there rather than the normal commercial traffic. So right now I've told them that that's what we want to do as soon as we have enough military presence on Guam, and then we'll get the Patriot Express coming.
So what you're saying then is that by 2011 possibly or 12, this capability will be returned.
Yes, ma'am. And I'll get you the exact date because it had to do with the movement of the Marines coming down.
Very good. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
The gentleman from Texas, Mr. Conaway, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm sitting here listening to some of my colleagues, and I feel like I've gone through a time warp back when earmarks were okay, and monster earmark requests going on for General Ham to move his command, so I will refrain from doing that. General McNabb, the requirement under the QDR for some 330-plus planes includes 111 C5s of some configuration. The list I've got is 36 C5As that either have or will go through the AMP program, and 52 Bs and Cs that have gone through both engines and the AMP program. Where are the other 23, or what are the other 23?
So right now we are asking for the MCRS 2016 said we needed 32.7 million ton miles, which equates to about 301 total big airplanes. That's 222 C-17s, 52 C-5Ms, and 27 C-5As.
Okay, so you would be supportive of, I suspect, of that 23 that are missing off that list, they are parked someplace and may never get off the ground again. And we are maintaining airplanes that in a commercial venue you'd never do for a variety of reasons.
Sir, what we were hoping for is the ability to, as we bring on the additional C-17s, that we can put them at places like McChord and Charleston, take our older C-17s and replace some of those old C-5As at some of the different bases. That'll get them new airplanes. It'll extend the service life on our C-17s.
Well, speaking of the service life, the operational tempo that you're currently experiencing, I don't necessarily, none of us hope it's over the next 5 or 6 years, but given that each plane has a set useful life of some period of time, what impact does this current operational tempo have on that fleet? And will it last until 2025, 2030, whenever it is we'll decide to replace the C-17?
Yes, sir. We bought the C-17s for 30,000 hours, and we plan to do 1,000 hours a year. So basically 30 years is what we were trying to get out of that asset. I would say that we were overflying that, especially early on in OIF and OEF. In fact, this committee and the Congress helped us with that. We said we need about 7 to 10 airplanes to make up that, to get the flying hours back down.
In your analysis, you've addressed that operational tempo issue with respect to the life of that fleet.
And if we keep, we may have to address it again if it just keeps, we stay at this tempo. But as I mentioned before, we're using a lot of commercial in a way.
Right, I understand that. But at some point in time, if you come back to us and say we need C-17s, it's going to be a whole lot more expensive at that point in time, whatever the circumstances are. General Ham, congratulations on the new command. Just a quick inference. When Gates was here last week, he said that one of the core missions of NATO that we would support would be the search and rescue. And maybe I misunderstood you to say that was an ad hoc thing that may occur, but it seemed to me that we were going to provide the search and rescue for the Libyan work. Did I misunderstand that?
No, sir. You understood it correct. It falls under the category of what we call unique U.S. military capabilities. Okay. So we thought we were the best suited to do that.
Are those your assets?
For the most part, they are. Yes, sir.
Okay.
With our Special Operations Command Africa.
All right. Your budget request for 2012 is $289 million. How much out of Hyde is this Libyan operation going to cost you, assuming it goes past September, or October 1st?
Yeah, Congressman, financially, it won't affect the headquarters very much, but where the cost is borne is with our service components, in this case, particularly the Air Force and Navy service component commands for AFRICOM, who have sortied ships, aircraft, and personnel at a rate higher than they were anticipating to do.
Okay, so they'll have to figure out some way to pay for that. That's not necessarily your responsibility.
That's correct, sir. That burden will, through the service component commands, fall back to the services.
One of the advantages that we were told about AFRICOM was that you would, in effect, create long-term relationships between the mill-to-mill kind of things that would go on in these developing countries. Given it's a relatively young command still at this point in time, are you experiencing the kind of opportunity or availability to send the folks back to the same countries on enough of a basis so that we are building relationships there that can be used in a crisis if we need them?
I am just learning about this, but in my first 2 trips to the continent, which were admittedly far too short, but to Djibouti and to Kenya, I in fact found exactly that circumstance where U.S. service personnel had been back for repetitive assignments. And in those 2 cases, the Djiboutians and the Kenyans, very welcoming of that because it's people they know and understand. I think there's probably more that we can do in the future, and I'll look to do just that.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You're back. Thanks, gentlemen.
Thank you, Generals. We're down now. It's 2-2, and you've got a much deeper bench than we do, so I'm going to be very quick on just a couple of follow-up questions. General McNabb, if I could follow up on a question that Mr. Klein asked. If the FAA goes forward with the rule on crew rest requirements, will it affect TRANSCOM's ability to execute the mission?
Sir, as Mr. Babbitt went through it, he said that he would consider what I was worried about is that one size doesn't fit all, and our non-scheduled carriers are a bit unique, and to make sure that we've built in the proper safety program for them. If they do the one size fits all, it will impact us in how quickly we can do it, velocity, and it'll also drive up the cost for our U.S. carriers fairly dramatically, to the point where I again start worrying about the competitiveness they will have on making sure that they can take advantage of modern airplanes. That's probably my biggest concern, and I do think between ORM and crew rest facilities and making sure that we look at what their mission's like, it is a little different than the legacy carriers, and I just hope that they will consider that there is a difference there.
Can I just drill down on that question just a little bit more? I'm aware of the Air Force Institute of Technology study that found that up to 70% of the missions flown for you by the civilian carriers may be impacted depending on how the rule is implemented. That seems substantial to us, given how much you rely on them. Can you just put that in context for us so the committee has a good feel of where that falls?
Sure. When we set up our concept of ops and how we're going to base airplanes, especially when you talk to a far off place like Afghanistan, and if you've got to drive in some additional crew rest and changing crews, it drives in some perplexity into the system that becomes a little bit tougher to manage. Right now, we have that. We've been driving very hard to get those modern airplanes, and like I said, if 70% are affected, it means that they would have to have additional stops. They'd have to lay in additional crews. The circadian rhythm, the issue with making sure that if they're, as you're traveling around the world, Afghanistan is 12 hours out from here. So if you have, when you think about the domestic here in the U.S., they don't have to deal with a 12-hour change in circadian rhythm every day. So what we got to do is make sure that we think through all of those parts to the puzzle and make sure that one size doesn't necessarily fit all. Fatigue will affect everybody, but you need to come up with programs that adjust to that reality. I've flown lots of missions and have 5,600 hours. I will say that there is a big difference from flying 4 to 6 sorties in the U.S., very quick stops, dealing with air traffic, all of the problems that you have on the ground, vice flying a one-hop on the same crew duty day and going all the way, for instance, to Incirlik and stopping for the night. I would just say the fatigue level is different, and it takes different approaches, is my recommendation.
Thank you, General. General Ham, just a couple of questions for you. When just a few weeks ago, I had the privilege of being over at your command, and I had just gotten back from visiting several of the countries in Africa. And one of the things on every briefing that you would find is that there would be a host of eras that would be drawn from all of the different operations that are going on, some of them by the State Department, some of them by DOD. And the question that always puzzles me is who is managing all the eras? Who is the one authority that is making sure that we are not overlapping and that those missions are all coordinating in the right fashion? Can you shed a little bit of light on that for me as we see that overlap between state and DOD and all the various operations that we have going on in Africa? Who is ultimately managing that to make sure the jointness is done right?
Yes, sir. While there isn't an overarching command that is in fact directing that, this is our interagency process at work, and each of us who participates in that has a responsibility. So me at Africa Command, certainly Assistant Secretary Carson at State, the folks at the Office of the Secretary of Defense and USAID and other agencies. What I think we've got to do is make sure we've got a forum through which the most senior folks can collaborate and make sure that we have in fact synchronized our efforts to the highest degree possible. My sense is probably a bit the same as yours. At least my initial blush at this is that at least within the military side, I'm not sure that that's quite as tightly wound as it perhaps ought to be, and it is something that I'd like to take a look at as I begin my tenure.
And if you do take a look at that, if you would give us that information back as you examine it. Just two other quick questions. One of the other concerns I had was In talking to the various players over there, one of the things we consistently heard from the State Department was defense doesn't do anything unless we okay it. That gave some of us just a little bit of concern as to the role that the State Department had and the role that the Department of Defense had. Can you tell us and explain a little bit about those two functions and how they're collaborating?
Yes, sir, certainly. We would all agree that it's far better when state and defense agree on a way ahead in any particular matter.
That's given.
But sometimes that's just not the case. But we have a mechanism, again, through our interagency process, through the national security staff, for the various departments to bring forward matters where there's perhaps some disagreement on the way ahead. I'm confident that, again, as I am able to get started in this command and build the relationships with Secretary Carson, with others in the interagency, that those times will be few and far between where we'll have very strong disagreement. But where we do, I don't feel any reservation whatsoever about saying, I'm sorry, I just can't get to agreement on this. We need to take it into the interagency deliberative process to have disagreements adjudicated. We know how to do that. We do it all the time in our government, and I'm very comfortable inside that process.
Last question. What are the authorities granted to the U.S. Chiefs of Mission regarding combatant command activities in the countries to which they're posted, and do you believe that these authorities are sufficient?
Sir, in general, they are. I mean, clearly the Chief of Mission is the senior American representative. He is the representative of the President in those countries, and so our efforts are nested with the Chief of Mission. There may be some very unique circumstances where there would be a military effort that might require an authority other than the Chief of Mission. Those are probably addressed not in an open session.
Good. Well, I think we've had all of our questions. Thank you so much for your service to our country and for your patience today and for sharing your experience and expertise with us. And this hearing's adjourned.